Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the second video in this series where I explain why we cannot trust game developers. If you haven't seen the first video, you should go and check it out. It's got a bunch of good information and kind of leads right into this one. It explains my thinking, some important points, and basically just gets you an overall refresher of why we're starting out where we are. But either way, now we're going to talk about microtransactions. And to do that, we're going to have to take it back. Way back. To a mystical time known as 2006, when Chris Brown was still a chart-topping, non-Rihanna-beating superstar. Four Loko still had caffeine in it, and we lost one of the greatest men this world has ever known. And while we were too busy with one tragedy, none of us noticed that gaming had officially started on one of the most predatory and slippery slopes that we had ever seen in the industry. And it all started with something pretty harmless: a set of horse armor. In March of 2006, the RPG game Oblivion was released by gaming giant Bethesda, and only 1 month later in April they decided to test the waters with some DLC that was purely cosmetic, a set of golden horse armor that was only $2.50. The funny thing is, some people were actually mad right off the get-go. They thought it was stupid and insignificant and priced too high for something that was just going to be purely cosmetic and didn't add anything to the game. Which is pretty hilarious that they thought it was priced too high, because if you look at some in-game stores now, there are some cosmetics and cosmetic bundles that cost as much as a full game. Now, I can't find the specific sales numbers for the Horse Armor DLC, but Todd Howard, the current and at the time of the game's release director of Bethesda, has come out and said that the Horse Armor DLC outperformed multiple other DLCs that they had put out for the same game. So clearly it didn't hurt their bottom line. I think it's also important to quick talk about the terms DLC and microtransactions. DLCs technically started in 1997 with a game called Total Annihilation by Cave Dog Studios. Instead of revamping or rehauling the game or putting out a whole nother game, they would intermittently put out updates that would add things like new characters, map expansions, and new game modes just to keep the game fresh and exciting. And of course, this was a great idea because it retained a player base, so it led to various other games doing this for the foreseeable future, and eventually charging for it. While microtransactions are technically DLCs, they're differentiated in a few ways. First and foremost being that DLC is usually regarded as something that adds on to the base game. This could be new characters, new maps, plot extensions, or entire new storylines. Whereas microtransactions are something your 6-year-old sibling will not stop stealing your mom's credit card for.
This motherfucker got 43, 49,000. I'ma fuck you up.
Generally, microtransactions don't add anything to the game. They're skins, battle passes, loot boxes that are basically bought just to show all the other players you have more money than them. This was, however, until a couple companies decided to take it a step further. While it was generally understood that microtransactions were just going to be purely for cosmetics, they quickly saw how much money they were raking in, and came up with a genius strategy. Why don't we make game mechanic loot boxes, therefore making the game pay to win?
Do you consider them ethical?
So what we look at as surprise mechanics.
And this is extremely damaging, not only to the game but also to player psychology. Loot boxes are extremely addictive, and have even been found as a form of illegal gambling that children have access to in countries such as the Netherlands, where they've just full-on outright banned them. And it seems like a couple other countries are starting to follow suit. And most people would agree it's for a pretty good reason. Young kids probably shouldn't have access to this type of monetary system. They don't necessarily understand the gravity of what they're doing or the actual implication of the money they're spending. Remember a minute ago when I said, whereas microtransactions are something your 6-year-old sibling will not stop stealing your mom's credit card for. That wasn't me making a joke. That actually happened. And there's basically an unlimited number of these stories and almost nothing being done to regulate it. And one of the worst offenders, and practically dubbed as the boogeyman of loot boxes, is EA. The best example of this is their Ultimate Team on the FIFA franchise, where gamers get new and better players to build the strongest team that they possibly can. And the best way to get new and better players is by opening loot boxes. This means if I spend $1,000 versus someone who spends nothing, I can put together a much better team than them, and practically shit stomp them until they cry. And of course, this is going to make them want a better team, and ultimately buy more loot boxes. And because your team and players aren't transferable from one FIFA game to the next, this cycle happens every single year. But this strategy has backfired. When EA announced Star Wars Battlefront 2, you could hear gamers and Star Wars nerds across the globe celebrating, just popping open a nice vintage Mountain Dew and sucking on their finest menthol Jewel Pod. And that was until everyone figured out that to unlock certain players, you would have to spend hundreds of hours just to get them if you didn't want to outright buy them. But of course, no major company would do this to their bread and butter. They'd only do it to the smaller, more insignificant, cool one-off characters, right? Not the ones people, like, specifically buy Star Wars games to play as, right? 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 This led to an incredible amount of backlash, not only from major news outlets, but practically every corner of social media. In fact, it cemented itself in a little bit of internet history when EA responded to a post on the subreddit Battlefront 2. They claim they locked the characters so players would feel a sense of pride and accomplishment when they unlock their favorite heroes. And this ultimately became the most downvoted comment in Reddit history, with almost 700,000 downvotes. But hey, at least EA can feel a sense of pride and accomplishment in being number one. And just to put that in perspective, the second most downvoted comment in Reddit history has about 89,000 downvotes, and it was from a guy asking to get downvoted. Ultimately, EA dropped the whole loot box thing after they saw their sales numbers fall, and it actually turned into a pretty good game with a sizable player base. Well, that's if you actually played it. I think a lot of people like myself were in the same boat of not wanting to buy it anymore, regardless of how excited we were just a few weeks prior, because of the bullshit EA tried to pull. I mean, it didn't sit right with us, and it ultimately ended up ruining the game and the experience for a lot of people. The bright side to all of this was it did show that there was a limit to how much shit people were willing to shovel before they bomb reviews, requested refunds, and just outright boycotted the game. Sadly, microtransactions do seem like they're here to stay, with the majority of games opting out of a traditional rank up and unlock system for some sort of battle pass, most games now having enough new cosmetics that everyone on the map can look different, and in-game currency like shark cards, Robux, and V-Bucks being added to every 12-year-old's Christmas list. And that's probably just how it's gonna be from now on. And honestly, it's not that bad, as long as it just sticks to cosmetics rather than a pay-to-win system. To me, the worst part about microtransactions is that it's slowly leading to the death of single-player and multiplayer campaign-driven games. Single and multiplayer campaign-driven games are obviously a massive part of the gaming community and industry as a whole. They used to be the biggest part of the industry, so clearly they're never going to fully die, but their prevalence is starting to diminish. I mean, let's look at some split-screen campaign games. Some of the best of them came out almost a decade ago. Halo 3, Borderlands 1 and 2, Portal 2, the Left 4 Dead series. Hell, Portal 2 is the second highest rated game on the Steam marketplace, and it didn't even get a third installment. Well, why is that? The issue with single-player and multiplayer campaign-driven games that don't have an online mode is there's no money to be made on the back end of it. All your revenue is going to come from that initial purchase and maybe a DLC or two down the road. With online multiplayer at the level it is, there's so much more money to be made in selling a couple million people a battle pass every few months, especially for a game like Fortnite, who's still going strong after 4 full years. Not to mention there's no need to buy overpriced skins when the only player who's going to see it is the player playing the game. I'm not trying to impress myself, I already know I'm trash. It was extremely nice to see a game like It Takes Two take home the 2021 Game of the Year award, because it did still show that there's a market for this and people who are willing to accept it and love it. Regardless, I think you would be hard-pressed to find anybody willing to disagree that these types of games are falling by the wayside while these massive multiplayer experiences are taking over. And it's mostly in part due to how we now pay for games. Now, I was actually going to end the video right around here, but something massive just happened that is a whole subject I was kind of going to stay away from, but now I feel the need to go into. So unless you're like my grandfather with dementia, you probably heard that Microsoft just acquired Activision Blizzard for an insane $68.7 billion. In the last decade, Microsoft has been on a spending spree that would put the US military to shame. They're practically collecting studios like Infinity Stones at this point. Compulsion, Mojang, Ninja Theory, Obsidian, Bethesda, and now Activision Blizzard, which practically has 10 studios to themselves. There's an absolutely abysmal number of small companies that aren't owned or at least backed by one of these massive corporations. And honestly, I can't tell you if this is going to be a minor annoyance or a really bad thing. It might be nothing more than just having to choose your next console based on which exclusive games you want to play, which a lot of us already do. On the darker side of things, it could lead to exactly what monopolies and oligopolies have been known for the past century. Price fixing, stolen IP, high barriers to entry, market manipulation, or, something I've been harping on this entire video, lack of innovation. When you get into a marketplace that has very few contenders, there's a very strong lack of incentive to do anything new or groundbreaking. Because as I said earlier, why would you when you know what you've got is already going to sell? And now, Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A. Nintendo. Nintendo has always kind of been in their own lane, and for good reason. Being able to market your exclusive games on your exclusive console with solid IP as your groundwork is unbeatable when it comes to profitability. Remember when I told you how many Mario games there were? Did you really need Mario in all of those games? I mean, did a kart racing game really need an Italian platforming plumber that's known for eating shrooms and stepping on turtles' heads as a protagonist? Did you really need a golf or tennis simulator with the Italian stallion as their headliner? Of course not. But the IP is so solid that they use it for games that might have not done as well without it. But as long as people are still interested in it, they're going to keep pushing it out wherever they can with less and less work put into it every time. I mean, just look at the most recent couple generations of Pokemon to come out. I mean, come on. A fucking cup of tea and a sentient sword. And I love Pokemon. I've seen the majority of the movies, played almost every game, and even watched the anime when I was growing up. But the entire concept is now so oversaturated. And before I get absolutely bent over with a Wii remote inside of me by every Nintendo fanboy from here to Kingdom Come, I do want to point out Nintendo has been putting out some good new IP within the last couple of years that's generally well received. Astral Chain, Fitness Boxing, good job. But there's absolutely no argument when it comes to saying that those games didn't receive a fraction of the budget or time as, say, the latest Zelda. But Zelda's going to sell better, so of course they wouldn't. And that's my fucking point. And it comes full circle to the beginning of this video. Rather than take the time and money to invest into something that could become the next Zelda, or Mario, or Pokemon, or God of War, or Elder Scrolls, they aren't willing to take that risk anymore. And that's one of the scariest parts about all these acquisitions to me. When it comes down to only a very few number of companies, they're all going to bank on their original IP rather than trying anything new. And by the time it comes down to your 23rd Battle Pass on Call of Duty Canada, you're going to realize we all got fucked. So, what can we do? Well, first and foremost, stop pre-ordering games. It incentivizes these companies to continuously put out trash, and you're paying for something you haven't even seen or played before. Wait until it comes out, or watch some early access gameplay. Read a couple reviews. Secondly, try new games. Try smaller games in different categories you might have not been a fan of before. Try some game by an indie developer you've never heard of. It might surprise you. Another great thing you can do is cut down on the cosmetics and bullshit you're buying that does nothing to add to the game. This doesn't mean that if you see a cool skin you're not allowed to buy it. It just means stop pumping more money into the game than the game itself is worth. Because that's one of the major reasons these companies are starting to care more about cosmetics and loot passes more so than the actual game or gameplay itself. If these companies care so much about our money, then spend it where it counts. As a final thought, I want to say that this whole video isn't supposed to be a rip on a specific game or company or capitalism in general. I'm just trying to point out what myself and a lot of other people have been noticing is happening to something we like a lot, and trying to use some facts and data to at least back it up. Of course, it's all subjective, and there are going to be plenty of people who don't agree with probably a lot of what I've said. I probably made fun of some of their favorite game series or studios. And that's okay, because everyone has a different opinion, especially when it comes to a massive subject like this. What I really want more than anything is for whoever's watching this just to look at gaming. Where was it at 10 or 15 years ago versus where is it at now? What are the pros and cons that have come with the development throughout those years? And honestly, what can we as consumers do to make sure that it's going to be the best it possibly can be for us in the future? Ladies and gentlemen, I've been your host for the evening, and I hope you enjoyed it. Good night.